I think that so much of this guilt that we feel, this ingrained ethos that we have to do all the things. And it's not realistic or reasonable for us to do all the things. And taking on all the things makes us feel terrible, and it's not sustainable.
Welcome to the Core Happiness Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Banks, a mindset and positive psychology coach. On this podcast, we discuss all things related to creating happiness from within. So let's do it. Welcome back to the show. Today, we are thrilled to have a special guest who's an absolute powerhouse in the world of time management and productivity. Coach Alexis Haselberger has dedicated her career to helping people do more and stress less. Her journey began with over 15 years in operations and human resources at several startups where she faced the challenge of managing more tasks than there were people to actually handle the task. And how many of us can relate to that? And it was in those high stress environments, while also raising a family, that she developed her unique strategies for productivity and stress management. Now, she has shared her wisdom with hundreds of thousands of individuals and worked with top-tier clients like Google, Lyft, Workday, Capital One, and Upwork, just to name a few. She is here today to give us tips on how we can take control of our time, do more of what we want, less of what we don't want, all while ensuring that we can achieve our goals without succumbing to that dreaded burnout. So, Alexis, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here.
We actually have a bit of a similar background in that we were working in operations, especially with startups. The difference is I was in creative marketing and you've been in HR. So I'm aware, especially with the operations side and being brought in to help streamline workflows and increase productivity and efficiency and time management. There's always at the crux sort of those operational goals. So can you start by just telling us a little bit about your experience in HR and how that experience shaped your understanding of productivity and stress management?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And yeah, it does sound like we have some similar backgrounds, even if we were in slightly different functions.
Yeah.
When you're in a startup, you're doing a lot of things. You're doing more than just your job
Absolutely.
description. So yeah, I like to say that I did all the things that weren't sales and engineering. So those are the things, in these startups that I was doing, which kind of got encapsulated by HR and operations, but it's things like logistics, facilities, legal, finance, just all of the different things that somebody might look at that if you've never worked in a startup and be like, how could one person be handling all of these things? And I don't say that as like to boost myself up, but it's just like, that's the reality in a startup.
That's the requirement in a startup.
Yeah, like really, we're just hiring a bunch of engineers and then we hire somebody to kind of do everything else. And that was me, right? And so I very quickly learned that one, I wanted to do a really good job. It was important to me to do excellent work, but it was also really important to me to not be in the office until 10 p.m. like I saw a lot of people doing, right? And yes, of course, they were sometimes playing foosball, but still, I wanted a life outside of the office. And so I just started to kind of figure out what can I do here that is going to make it so that one, I can progress in my career, and two, I don't have to work these crazy hours and I'm still well regarded, right? And that's what I sort of saw. And so I knew that the answer was not to keep everything in my head. It was to systematize these things. And that was really how I got started. And of course, it all makes sense in retrospect, right?
Absolutely. I'm wondering too, especially because you have to wear so many different hats and you're in so many different roles, especially with HR and with operations. Did you identify any time wasters? And were there common themes within time wasters that you saw when you were in those roles?
I mean, I think a huge one is just distractions in general. I mean, studies show that when we get distracted or interrupted, it takes us on average 23 minutes to refocus on what we're doing. And I bet people listening right now are thinking yep, I maybe didn't know that, but I know that, right? I know that in my bones. I needed to be able to shut my door or put on my headphones so that I can focus, because if I have these distractions constantly, then it's really hard. And of course, this is back in the day when we didn't even have smartphones, right? So consider where we are right now. We weren't having all the notifications. So distractions, time waster number one. I think this one is kind of deceptive because we think that this one is actually us doing our job well, but it's being overly responsive. So having email notifications on or checking your email 50 times a day. It's like we think we're doing this because we're like, no, I'm responsive. I want to make sure that I get to people. But really what we're doing is kind of distracting ourselves again. And when we're in there, let's face it, we're not exactly processing our email. We're checking our email. We're just looking at it. We're maybe marking some things back as unread, and we're not actually handling them. And so that causes us to spend not only so much time in our inboxes, but it's not actually time that's valuable all the time, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're pointing out some really great ones. And I love this conversation because I think it is an aha moment for a lot of people listening too, especially distractions. And I think that's big when you're in the office. And before work from home or remote was a thing, that was always something that I tried to negotiate. More important than salary to me, I was like, I need at least one day of working from home so I could catch up on work because I realized my biggest distraction is being in the office. People coming around and wanting to chat and, hey, let's go out and grab lunch. It was great to have that social aspect, but that's also a huge distraction. I got no work done in the office.
Yeah, I also negotiated this in many of my jobs. And actually, my goal was like when my youngest kid is going to kindergarten, I want to be able to like pick him up from kindergarten. And so I negotiated like a part-time role and like a 30 hours a week role. I mean, I was still doing all the things, but still 30 hours a week. And then I negotiated like, okay, actually, I now need to like be places and do my work. I need to be working from home some. And I started out with one day. And then eventually I flipped that. So I was only one day in the office. And that day in the office, I would just not plan to get anything done. Like my whole goal for being in the office was connecting with people, having one-on-ones with my direct reports, having lunch with people, going to coffee. And I just learned like, I don't even plan to do work on that. If I get work done on that day in the office, it's bonus.
Yes, that's so true. And then I even love that you say with the technology and just checking emails as a distraction. I was in a coaching session with a client recently, and essentially that was exactly what was happening. It was like my whole day is going by and I'm not getting anything done. I'm not even having a chance to work on self-care or take time for lunch. And then when we looked at why, it was I'm getting, late emails or early emails. And then as soon as I get that ping, I feel like, oh, wait, I have to stop what I'm doing and I've got to respond at this moment. And that responsiveness and then having that technology. And now there's Slack and we're constantly getting these pings. And I'm a huge advocate of having focus time where you can turn it off, where you're not available. Like you don't even get pings. You're not even tempted to even look at anything.
Yes. Oh my God. You're speaking my language right now. And yeah, I think that the thing that you're bringing up, I call this phenomenon that you've just described, I call it letting the day happen to you,
Ah,
right?
yes.
Which is, it's like we start with like maybe we did some planning, we have a plan. And then we start with email, and that's a downward slide after that because it's like we're busy. We're not slacking off. Like we're not over there on Instagram or Twitter or anything. Like we are actually working. But yet then it's 6 o'clock all of a sudden, and we realize that we've been working hard all day, but we have crossed like not a thing off the list that we started with at 9 a.m. Right.
Yes.
And one thing that you really mentioned there was like, it's that email, right? It's those messages, it's those Slacks that kind of pull us in. And so one thing that I share with all my clients and I ask them to try out, and I would ask your listeners to try out as well, is just for the first hour of your workday, your first non-meeting work hour, right? If you start with meetings, fine, but like your first non-meeting work hour, don't get up earlier to make it happen, but like your first non-meeting work hour, just delay checking email and Slack by an hour. Because the amount of stuff that you can get done in that hour before you've opened up any of those loops that want your attention is enormous. And people are always scared to do this because it feels like, well, but what? I won't know what's there. And that's true. You won't know what's there for an hour. And whether you get back to somebody at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. is not going to make a lick of difference to them, but it is going to make a huge difference to your productivity for that day.
And I will say, because I get a lot of pushback on that as well. It's like, well, I feel like I'll fall behind if I don't respond immediately, if I don't wake up and look at emails, or I feel like I'm going to miss something important, or it's the 1 hour that I take, something crucial is going to happen, and then I'm going to lose this deal, or a client's going to be upset. But to your point, it's 1 hour. It should not matter for 1 hour. And if something that detrimental is happening within that 1 hour, you'll be notified in other ways outside of an email, right?
This is total. I'm always saying this, like nobody uses email in an emergency, right? Nobody is like, well, the building was on fire, but because you didn't answer your email, we just left you there, right? And the other thing that I say to my clients about this, because I get the exact, sounds like we get a lot of the same pushback on this. And the things that I always say are like, look, have you ever gone to the doctor during the middle of a workday, right? You're probably not checking your email for an hour. I have a client, we were just talking about this last week, and he's a trial attorney. And I was like, well, I mean, are there any times where you've ever just not checked your email? And he was like, well, I mean, I'm in court every week for several hours at a time. And I'm like, yeah, you're in court several hours at a time every week, and you're not checking emails during that time, and nothing bad is happening. Now, I will say there are going to be some people listening who are like, but my job is different. I mean, I worked with a company that was in PR, and they were like, literally, we do PR for hotels. Sometimes someone has died in a hotel, and like that is actually a PR emergency, right? But those are few and far between. We can scan for those, and then we don't have to go in to all of the email to get stuck into it. Sometimes people are like ER doctors. Yes, you need your pager on. There are going to be certain circumstances, but for the vast majority of knowledge workers, you can take an hour.
One of the things you mentioned, especially with working with startups, like you said, I don't want to work until 10 p.m.
Yeah.
And I find that people feel like they have to almost, right? Especially when you think about work-life balance. And I always say work-life balance is, I don't want to say it's elusive, but it means different things to different people.
Yeah.
My definition of work-life balance may be different than yours and different than Joe's down the street. But regardless of what your definition is, it does seem to be this thing that people are constantly trying to achieve. And the more that people try to create a balance, it ends up being, I'm just going to leave work. I'll go home, have some family time, log back in. So
Right.
they are logging back in at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, how can individuals create a more balanced daily schedule that accommodates their work responsibilities and their home life?
Yeah, so I think that you make a really good point that balance is like this elusive word. I've been toying with using the word harmony instead, like work-life harmony, because balance implies that it's somehow going to be 50-50, and that's just never the case, right? But I agree with you. It's kind of a fraught term at this point.
Yes.
But one thing that I want to touch on what you said was that people feel like they need to do this, like that it is an expectation that they're going to get in trouble if they don't, et cetera. And there's a couple of things that I think about this before we move into how we decide what the daily schedule is. So one of them is just really thinking about, is this expectation real? Has somebody told me that I have to work until 10 p.m.? Is this a real expectation? Or is this something that I'm perceiving and assuming I have to do? And when I ask this question to people, I don't think I've ever met somebody who said, well, yeah, my boss told me I have to work till 10 p.m. And so I think that's the first thing to say. It's like, just because it's happening doesn't mean it's a true expectation that you have to do. That doesn't mean that it's easy to buck the trends of what's going on in your workplace. But I think that's the first step, is actually questioning, is this real? Is this something that is true that I am expected to do? If it is, then we got to go down a different path. But if it's not, then I think we can start to kind of slowly reset some of those boundaries. And the reality is that nobody's going to set boundaries for you. And also, nobody knows what's going on with you. Nobody really understands how much workload you have. There are studies that said that managers are only aware of about 60% of the workload of any of their direct reports. And so your manager is going to keep giving you work as long as you keep absorbing it. So I think the first step is just like resetting some boundaries. And I often tell my clients, like, throw me under the bus, be like, I don't know, I'm working with a productivity coach, and that I will actually be more productive if I try X, Y, or Z. Maybe we just start putting on our out of office reply or away message on Slack at 8 p.m. instead of 10 p.m. Maybe we start there. And when we see that, like, okay, nothing really terrible has happened, we just kind of inch it up over time, because it is really a lot harder to reset boundaries than it is to set boundaries, right? So the other piece of advice I would have around this is, if you are starting a new job, or if you're coming back from parental leave, or if you're coming back from a sabbatical, or if you're coming back when you're kind of like at a transition point, a new point, that's the time to set your firm boundaries. You don't have to tell everybody, oh, I'm setting these boundaries, but people will expect from you what you have given to them. I see this mistake happening all the time, where people start a new job. They're like, I'm going to crush it. I'm going to work so hard these first 3 months. And like, I am just going to make sure that they know I am indispensable. And they do that by working really long hours. And then at the 3-month mark, they're like, great, I'm getting great reviews. My like 90-day was fantastic. I'm going to like go back to normal me. And everyone's like, what happened? Why are you slacking? What's going on? And so we set those expectations. But I would really start by just saying, like, what are those small boundaries I can set? Or maybe in the morning, it's that you have set on your cell phone that you have quiet hours or you have whatever, so that you can't physically check your work email from bed. Or better yet, remove your work email from your phone. Maybe no one will do that, but set these boundaries, because it's a lot harder for us to resist the temptation, and it is a temptation, than it is to just remove it altogether.
Absolutely. And I will say one thing that you said that is so true. Usually people say, when I say, is this something you're required to do? Are you required to log back in? Are you required to work late? And usually they say yes. And then I say, but is somebody telling you that? And then they say, well, no. So then where does that requirement come from?
Right.
Because I'm like, if we say perceive, they're like, I'm not perceiving it. I genuinely do feel like I have to log back in. And then I'm like, but who's telling you?
Right.
Or when has somebody said, why aren't you logged back in? Or somebody checking to see if you're logged back in. And then that's when it's like, oh, well, no. So I love that you said that, because it does take that acknowledgement and awareness of, where's this pressure coming from? If it's coming from me, then I can control that and I can change that.
Right.
And another thing that you said, when I actually just talked to somebody about this the other day, is setting that standard. I had someone who is a mom, and she's also really dedicated to her job, and she wants to grow and she wants to increase visibility within the executive leadership. And so she's doing all this work. And then she's like, well, summer's here and I really want to focus on spending some time and being with my kids. And then she's like, but everyone now is like, if I go to pick my kid up, or if I'm going to take them to the doctor, or just anything, or even just trying to take a vacation, like even on my vacation, I'm expected to work. And it was like, we have to reset that standard, because all those boundaries that you originally had, you let them go when you were in overachieving mode. That reset the standard. So now that's what everyone expects of you. So you do have to sometimes, to your point, when you get to that pivotal point, or when there's an opportunity to reset or establish boundaries, you have to do that. Even if you've established them before, you might have to do it again. And then just be aware of, what's the standard that I'm putting out.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Which brings me to another thing, which is like, when we set boundaries, we want to use positive language, right? We don't want to say, I'm not available from 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. We want to say, the best time to reach me is 8 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Love it.
Right?
Absolutely. And one thing that I love too, that people are starting to put in their email signatures, like, hey, I'm sending this email at a time that works for me. If it's reaching you after hours, please do not feel the need to respond.
Yes.
So I love that that is also something that people are starting to incorporate. And I think that that helps create that space for somebody to say, okay, even though I got this late at night or early in the morning, I don't need to respond immediately.
I love that too. I mean, I love that we're being mindful of each other. And especially in a world that is increasingly, or a workplace that is increasingly more global, where we're dealing with people in different time zones, I think that becomes even more important.
Absolutely.
And I think there's one other thing that we can do too. And I think this is especially true for leaders, because people do what we do, not what we say, right? Is to use schedule send. Slack has schedule send. Email has schedule send. If you are the boss and you are working at midnight, just schedule send that email to be sent at 9 a.m. Because even if you say, hey, you don't have to answer this right now, you're setting up this perceived expectation that because you're working, everyone else should be, even if you've said that's not true.
Excellent point. And one of the things I want to talk about too, while we're talking about work-life balance, is, and I know that you're a mom, and I hear from my friends, my family, from clients, mom guilt is a real thing. And so when you are trying to balance work commitments with home commitments, and trying to also be present, and then you have children who are like, hey, why do you work so much? Or why do you work late? Or, it's a lot of guilt, because you're like, well, I really feel like I need to do great in this job, but I also want to be able to be present with my child. So I'm wondering, as a mother, how do you deal with that portion of it, the mom guilt and juggling?
It's a double-edged sword, right? It's like people feel guilty at work because they're not with their kids, and guilty at home because they're not answering those emails. And it just feels like you can't win. And I think that when we think about, I am a mom. I have 2 teenage boys now, which I can't believe they're like bigger than me. But what I think about that mom guilt is that one of the things that we can do and this is going to sound very practical, is plan. I think that is one of the best ways that we can think about what makes sense for us and not be just always on the fly about what we're doing and when. So one of the ways that we can do this, I'm going to start with let's be present at home, because let's just say it, like our families are more important than our jobs, right? And one of the things that we can do is at the end of every workday, just spend 10 minutes making a realistic plan for the next day. Dumping everything out of your head, doing a brain dump. What are all those open things that you're thinking about? What are those things that you don't have time to do today, but you do have to do, and you don't want to be thinking about them when you are reading to your kid? And let me just tell you, I am not immune. I have certainly been reading to my kids, and they ask me a question about what's happening in the book, and I have been like, I have no idea. I've just been reading the words on the page. I've been thinking about something else. That one time, like one of my kids told me that he thought my favorite thing was working. And I think that was a real wake-up call for me. I wasn't even working late. I was just working at home. And so he saw that, and we had to have some real conversations about that. So I think planning is one thing that can really help us kind of mentally separate. I think also putting, if we're going to be doing we all have, we got to plan for summer camps. We have to, whatever, to the extent that you can plan for when you're going to do that, right? So that it doesn't feel like, oh, this is this mad dash of things I need to do right in the middle of the workday while I'm competing with all of these other work things that I have. The more we can just expand that planning horizon a little bit, so that if we do need to sign up for the summer camps at 10 p.m. on Tuesday, because if we don't do that, then we know we're not going to get the slot or whatever, that we've actually just booked that on our calendar. We don't need to make it public, it could just say busy, but really planning for those things helps us to feel like we can be present with whatever the thing is that we're doing at the time, because we know there's a place for the other things.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're constantly juggling and you're trying to manage home life, you're trying to manage work life, and you're trying to be productive and present in both. And like you said, it's more about trying to find that harmony. But when trying to find that harmony, that is also when people have a tendency to reach burnout. And so from your perspective, are there signs usually that someone can recognize for early signs of burnout, or is there anything to do to prevent burnout in terms of stress management?
I mean, I think one of the things I'm going to say, and this really comes into mom guilt too,
Mm.
is do less things. Like one of my kids is doing club volleyball right now. And I am on this thread of all the parents, and the coaches are saying, hey, we need some volunteers to do this, to do this. I am staying silent. That is not something I can take on right now. I am not doing it. I've been getting emails all week. Oh, we need room parents for your kid's 8th grade class. You know what? I'm not doing it. If they need supplies, great, I'll send them in. Somebody needs some muffins, fantastic, I'll do it. But I'm not doing these things that are going to take a lot of my time and attention, because I know I'm going to resent them. And so I think this is one of those things where one of the signs that we are leading to burnout is when we start feeling resentful of the things that are on our plate. And sometimes we've agreed to something and it's we can't quite get out of it. Maybe we already agreed to be the room parent, right?
Mhm.
We're not going to stop in the middle of the year. That would not be great. But what we're going to do is we're going to learn from that. And we're not going to do it next year. You know what? There are plenty of people who do have time, who love to volunteer. Maybe there are people who are not working outside of the home, right? And if you are no, I really want to do that. And yeah, I am working a full-time job, but this is really important for me to show up in my kids' class. That's great, right? But just know that that's a commitment that you're making, and you might need to take something else off your plate. So one way that I share with my clients that might be helpful is when we get asked to do something, or even when we are asking ourselves to do this, or assuming that we have to do this thing, whatever it is, I want us to stop first, breathe, and don't say yes immediately. Because as women, and we've been talking about moms, and as women, we are socialized to say yes,
Yes.
to be nice, to do the thing, to not make waves, to whatever. And so if you can even just make yes not your default response, right? You can still say yes after you've thought about it. But just first, just say, oh, let me think about it, right? Or somebody's asking you face to face, let me see if I have room in my schedule for this. Just don't give a committed yes. Then come back and say, okay, is this something I really want to do? This is something that would light me up, that would make my life better in some way. If so, then you got to ask yourself, do I have room for it?
Yes.
Do I have room for this thing in my world? If yes, great, say yes. If no, then you have another question you got to ask yourself. Am I willing to give something else up that I'm already doing to add this thing to my plate? right? Because we can't just absorb, absorb, absorb. And when we try to do that, when we say yes to everything, that's when we end up in these positions where we're getting towards the burnout. So I really think it's about setting ourselves up for success. And that takes some real habit change and some mindset change, because I feel a little bit guilty, I'm going to say it, that I have not responded at all to these nice people who are saying, please help us with the volleyball stuff. You know what I'm going to do? I am going to go to Costco and I'm going to bring the muffins, right?
Yes. Yes.
I am going to participate in a way that aligns with my own values of my time.
I love the fact that you talk about overcommitment, because I think women have always, I don't know what it is, and I don't know why we do. It's like we are supposed to serve. We are supposed to say yes. We are supposed to rise to the occasion and take care of everyone and everything. And so I love that you said that. And the fact that the early signs of burnout could be that resentment. And I think that's a big one, because that, I think, shows up way more frequently than we even realize. The amount of times that I've heard in sessions where someone's like, gosh, I'm so stressed to the point that when I wake up in the morning, I'm just like, oh, I'd rather stay in bed. I want to stay asleep. That is resentment. And that is an early sign of burnout.
Yes. Did you know that there is also a scientific term for this called the yes damn effect? And I bet I don't even have to explain it to know what it means, right? But I will, just in case there's anyone out there that's questioning it. The yes damn effect is when you say yes to something, and then when that thing comes up, your first thought is, damn, I don't want to do this. And we do this all the time. And that's why I think it's like so important to just move that dial, right? And if we're going to say no, it's better to say no up front than to resent the thing for 3 months and then have to do it, or worse yet, resent the thing and then like flake out on it at the last minute.
Absolutely agreed. For somebody listening who's saying, wow, that kind of sounds like me. I'm a little resentful. Maybe I'm at the beginning of burnout, or I just have been really stressed for several weeks in a row. Like, what are some tips or techniques that somebody can do to either avoid getting to that point, or when you're at that point to bring yourself back down?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about when we're at that point already, because I bet that's where a lot of
Yeah.
people find themselves, right? It's like, well and good to think about how we could prevent something, and we want to do that. But also when we're there, it feels sometimes like we have no options. And so
Absolutely.
what I would say, if somebody's starting to feel that resentment, or like, I just have too much on my plate, I'm overcommitted, I would say that the first thing you want to do is actually look at all the things and like write it all down. What are all the things that you feel like you have to do, that you do have to do, that you've already committed to doing? Write it down, put it in your task app, put it on a piece of paper, put it in a spreadsheet. It doesn't really matter where you put it, but just get it out of your head and look at it. Go through and just make a little notation next to anything that doesn't have to be done at all. That actually, if this didn't happen, nothing would happen, right? Like, you know what? If you don't iron the shirts, probably who needs a shirt that's ironed these days anyways, or whatever, right? Like there are probably lots of things that we could just say, like, actually, there's not really any big consequence if this doesn't happen at all. You don't even have to decide right then that you're not going to do it, because sometimes that can feel like too much. Just like make a notation if you're like, probably the consequences are very low if this never happens. And you can do this for work and for personal stuff. The second level is go through that and say, like, is there anybody who could do this that isn't me? Are there things that are on my plate that need to be done, but they don't need to be done by me? Could they be done by my kids? Could they be done by my partner if I have one? Could they be done by a coworker, one of my direct reports? Could I outsource it? Could I ask ChatGPT to do it for me? What are the things that we can say, I don't need to do it? Because I think that so much of this guilt that we feel is exactly what you were saying before, this ingrained ethos, whether it's patriarchy or the Protestant work ethic or both, that we have to do all the things. And it's not realistic or reasonable for us to do all the things. And taking on all the things makes us feel terrible, and it's not sustainable. And so that's where I would start. Like I would start really practically, write it down and see what you can actually get. And then we can go to like, okay, what are you going to remove? How are you going to get out of this obligation, et cetera. But first, just reckon with the fact that you don't actually have to do it all.
That is so important. And I actually want to stay on that for a minute, because the mindset behind, but I do feel like I need to do it all. And then when you talk about delegation, like, why can't your kid help with that?
Yeah.
Why can't your husband help with that? Why can't
Yep.
your coworker help with that? Ask your boss to help with delegating it to someone else. Like, and then it always kind of comes back to that, well, by the time I explain it to someone, or it's just easier to do it myself.
Yeah.
And we have that whole thing where it's like, well, they may mess it up and then I might have to go back and clean it up after them. And it's that mindset. So what would you say
Yeah.
to someone who has that mindset?
Yes, I think that this mindset happens with almost everyone that I
Yes.
work with, right? With delegation, it's like, why do we not delegate? Two reasons. We think we can do it better and faster ourselves, or we don't want to overburden other people, right? We're overburdening ourselves because we think that we might overburden other people and we don't want that for them. So, first question really, why is it okay to do it ourselves, but not okay to do it other people? For delegation, I think there's a nuance here. Sometimes it is going to be easier and faster to do it yourself if it's like a one-time thing. I think about this with my assistant all the time. If this is just one thing that I'm doing once, it might be easier and faster for me to do it myself because it's going to take me longer to explain it to her. But if it's something that is going to be happening on the regular, or even if it's not on the regular, if it's something that's just going to happen again, it's actually probably worth the time spent up front to delegate that to somebody else. Will they be perfect at first or ever? No, you're not perfect either, right? But you will be able to get them there through iteration and feedback. The other side of delegation, especially for people who are delegating to people on their teams. I was working with this guy, it's like a tech leader one time, and he was like, I'm supposed to give this talk at this conference, and I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. But I can't give it to someone. I mean, that's a really big thing to put on somebody else. It's like giving a talk at a conference. So I don't know. I just can't do it. And he came back to me. I was pumping him up about delegation. And then he came back to me and he said, you know what? I delegated it to this guy on my team. And after he did it, he came back to me and he said, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do this. This was something that actually you didn't know, but has been on my list of things I wanted to do for a really long time. And I'd never had the opportunity. And you gave me the opportunity. And so I share this to say, like, we don't know what's going on in somebody else's inner world, right? When you delegate, we're not just dumping work on people. We're going to say, hey, I would love for your help on this. I think you'd be really great at this. Is this something you can take on? Do you have the bandwidth for this? If you don't, tell me that, right? Like, we can have a real human being to human being conversation about these things without all the assumptions. And then there's the other side, which is like, they're going to mess it up. And I think this happens more often with parents and chores for kids or even for their spouses. Like, they're not going to do it as well as I am, or they're not going to do it the same way as I am. You know what? That's just absolutely true. But you know what? I have not cleaned my own kitchen in about 8 years because my kids do it. Do they do it as well as I do it? They absolutely do not. It is not up to my standards a lot of the time. I do have to go back and say, hey, you missed this entire section of the kitchen over here. Like, that needs wiping too. Or like, hey, I noticed there are a lot of crumbs under the table and like you didn't do the dust bustering part or whatever. Do I have to do that? Yes. But I have not cleaned a kitchen in 8 years. So it's up to you. Do you want to clean the kitchen and be responsible for that? Or do you want to have a kitchen that is like slightly not exactly up to your standards, but you didn't have to do any of that work?
I think people think about delegating or actually lack of, so not delegating. Do it because I can just knock it out really quickly, and it's all about multitasking, right? Where it's like multitasking versus single tasking. And I know in
Yeah.
working in creative operations, that was always creative tasks. Like when the creatives have to switch between one thing to another, like it's the time to ramp back up and get back into that mindset that you were in creatively for
Yeah.
one thing to another. Was creative tasks is a time lost there. I'm curious what your thoughts are about multitasking.
Well, first we'll start with the science. Science tells us that multitasking is not real. That I think it's like 0.05% of people are actually capable of multitasking. And the rest of us are just context switching very quickly. I love that creative tax term, is that there's productivity loss there. And also it's really stressful, right? Like, we're moving back and forth. It feels like we're ping-ponging. It's not a good feeling viscerally. What studies show is that when we attempt to multitask, we lose about 40% of our productivity. 40%. And so that's what you were feeling when that creative tax switching. It's just that sometimes we don't realize it when we're on the phone and we're doing this and we're doing this. And people don't want to believe this, right? Like we want to think that like, yeah, of course we can multitask. We're doing all the things. But if you have ever been on a conference call or a Zoom meeting or whatever, while trying to type an email and verbatim typed what somebody is saying that is not at all related to the thing that you're doing, or if you, and I'm not saying I'm immune to this, if you have ever been on a conference call doing something else and you hear your name, Alexis, what do you think of this? And you say, oh, I'm so sorry, it cut out for a second. Can you please repeat the question, right? Like, we can't multitask. It doesn't work. Some people will come to me and say, but I can like ride my bike while listening to a podcast. Like, yes, you can. And the reason is that you're using two different modalities there, right? Like we can drive a car while listening to the radio. We can go running without falling down while listening to while having a conversation. But we can't use the parts of our mind that we're using to work to do a bunch of different things at once. And so I think multitasking is something that, I don't know, I used to have it on my resume, right? But over time, I've learned it's just not a thing that's real. And I experience that for myself too. It's like when I am focused on one thing and then I move to the next thing, when that thing is done, or, sometimes you do have to get interrupted, write down where you were and what you were doing. And then move on to the interruption and then come back to it, right? But yeah, multitasking, it's not a thing. I think we need to just like banish it from our world of thinking that it's something we can actually do because we
I
can't.
agree. And I think that especially at work or in corporate settings or professional settings, that's the expectation. And management or bosses or leadership say, like, you just have to multitask. But I agree. And is it even, to your point with the science, like, is it even scientifically possible? So I agree. I believe in time blocking. I think that's very helpful. But I definitely don't believe that you're gaining more by trying to do multiple things at once.
No, not at all. And I think that where this shows up the most that I see is with email, Slack, and the other work that we're trying to do. And so, when we come back to time blocking, even if we just start by time block a few times a day when you're going to be processing messages, maybe you're going to take a half an hour 4 times a day to process your email, et cetera. Even if you just start there, because a lot of people are like, well, I put the time blocks on the calendar and then I don't follow the time blocks, right? Like, don't start with the whole shebang. Just start with blocking off time where you're going to be in your email and in your Slack and other times where you're not. And I think that actually goes a huge way towards being able to focus and not be multitasking like
Yes,
that.
absolutely. And I usually say that to people too, is how your days usually go, especially if at work. So if you're at work and you know that you have a boss who genuinely is going to be pinging you right at 9 a.m., then take that 30 minutes from 9 to 9:30 and do a time block where you're checking emails or maybe you're responding to Slack. But it's a type of time blocking that you could do based on how your typical day would go. So then you're not worried about, well, I can't time block in the morning because people book over and I have these meetings. And then so you can work within your day and do a time block that works for you. It doesn't have to be what you see online.
And it doesn't even have to be static like that. Like for me, I have 2 45 minutes of blocks a day, and I call them EQT, which stands for like email/quick tasks, because there's a lot of like little quick tasks that happen in email, right? And generally I found that I need about an hour and a half of that a day. And so I have these like 2 45-minute blocks, and they're just kind of like booked out until the end of time. However, it's not like I'm doing them at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. every time. I'm looking at my day, I'm planning it, I'm looking at what meetings I have, and I'm moving those things around to make it make sense for that day. And I love what you're saying about like, if you know your boss pings you at this time, make that a time when you're available. Or if you know that maybe some workplaces, not a lot is happening after 4 p.m. So like, that's a great time for focus work, or like, whatever it is, you can track those patterns and experiment and see what works.
I know for me, that was a game changer, was planning my week out. And I would always make sure that I had my time blocks in there that I needed. But then the morning of, depending on what happened or what came up, or I would shift things around. And it was so much easier instead of just losing it and being like, oh, well, now I'm frustrated because I didn't get that time. Like I just moved things around.
Yes. And sometimes it's meetings that have popped in that you need to move things around. Sometimes it's just how you feel. Right? Like sometimes what I planned for today, I look at that and I'm like, actually, I don't feel like doing that first. I'm going to do that later. And I just swap something around. Yes, I'm so glad that you brought up this feelings about it being a game changer around the flexibility, because so often, I bet you hear this too, people feel like, well, if I put time blocks on my calendar and then I just didn't do them, well, now I've failed at this. Or I have, like, what is the point of it? It was just extra overhead because I didn't do it anyways. Whereas I tend to think of it as like structured fluidity, kind of. It's like your calendar can be a visual representation of your task list and your workload. And that helps you actually to make decisions because as things are coming in, you can say, actually, it's more important for me to do the thing that I had blocked right now. There might be an emergency that comes up and you say, you know what? Everything on my day has to shift because this thing that came in is way more important than any of those things. And in that case, you just get to feel good about the trade-offs, right? Because there's always going to be trade-offs.
Absolutely. That is so important. When we talk about structuring the day and especially using tools, calendar's a tool, but are there any particular tools or apps that you would recommend for better time management or organization or just ways that people can track their day?
Yes, so I certainly have my favorite, and it is called TickTick, Tick. And the reason that I really like this app is that the free version is great, right? Like so many of them out there, it's like, ugh, well, I don't want to have to learn this new thing. And then what if I don't like it and I paid for it, et cetera. The free version, great. You may never need anything more. It syncs seamlessly between all your devices. So I have a Mac computer, I have an Android phone. It syncs between all of it. It is like an external brain that allows you to really see, like you could have 500, 1,000 things in there, but you can also be like, these are just the 5 things I need to do today. And you don't have to see the rest of it. It has a lot of those features. So if you need it to do more complex things, it can do complex things. Like it has the Gantt chart feature, it has Kanban boards, it has all these features, it has Pomodoro type, like it has all this stuff, but you don't have to use it for it to be effective. And so I think that, one of the best things we can do to reduce mental overload is to stop using our memories, get it all out. So yeah, so TickTick is my all-time favorite app.
That is actually really, really helpful. I think people are always looking for a tool and then it's the time to set it up and then you test it out. And then is this working or is it not working? So I think it's great to have a suggestion that is just almost click and pay. You put in the information and then it's helpful. I wanted to ask one thing in terms of mornings, because that always seems to come up when people talk about productivity or having a very productive day. How do you start your morning? And I wanted to know from you, do you believe in that and having a very structured morning routine? And if so, how does one develop one?
This is always a very contentious
Yes.
topic, and I'm probably not going to give the answer that you expect. So I think that this is actually very personal,
Yes.
right? To what works for each person. So I'm going to tell you my morning routine as a time management and productivity coach. I set my alarm for as late as humanly possible. I snooze it like 5 times. And I usually get out of bed about 15 minutes before my first meeting, brush my teeth, put on my clothes, get my tea, and sit down at my computer because I am just a night person through and through. The world is built for morning people. But for me, that just doesn't work. That is what my brain wants to do in the morning times is sleep. And so that's my morning routine. I do exercise. I exercise usually about 5 or 6 p.m. That's the time that works best for me. I think that we need to think about what works for us as human beings. And if you're somebody who's like, you know what, it's really important for me to start my day in silence, for me to wake up before my kids do so that I have like a moment of peace, great. I think you should do that. But if you are someone who is feeling bad about the fact that you have never made a structured morning routine work, then I want you to let go of that guilt because we have to do what works for us and we have to do what works sustainably for us. Anybody can do anything for a short amount of time, but we come back to what actually works for us. So your morning routine can be as big or as little as you want it to be. It just has to work for you.
I love that answer. And here's why I love that answer. I also am a night person. I'm an evening person. I read The Power of High Performance, but it talked more about energy management. And so it's managing your energy throughout the day and planning your day around that. And I am not a person who wakes up very energetic in the morning. I have tons of energy in the evening. I'm just an evening person. I have more creativity. That's how it works for me. So morning routines, I am just not that person. At the same time, I also know that if I start my day doing something a little bit active, even if it's just 15 minutes or a quick meditation, that helps level set my day. But I don't have to be a morning person to do that. I can fit that in 30 to 45 minutes and still be great. Like it doesn't have to be part of the 5 a.m. club or someone who does like an hour workout earlier in the day, and you also have time to journal and you have time to eat breakfast. And if it works for a lot of people, I think that's great. But I think do what works for you and do what feels right.
Yes. And it may take some experimentation and a little bit of like deprogramming from society that tells us the early bird gets the worm. And honestly, the world is built for early risers, right? Like the fact that my kids are leaving the house at 7:30 when they're teenagers, like their brains aren't built for that either. Like the world is built for morning people. And so if you're not a morning person, you are kind of in this culture that says like, what's wrong with you? Your body and your body clock are just different and you need different things. And your job is to figure out what those things are and do them.
I wanted to take a minute to talk about your distraction action plan. I love that you provided this as a link to download. So if you could just give an example of the type of tip that somebody would get when they download your distraction action plan.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks for bringing that up. So, yes, this is something because we mentioned even at the top of the hour that distractions are one of the biggest time stealers. And it's something that a lot of folks don't feel like they have any control over. We're living in the world and these distractions are happening. And so the distraction action plan is a resource that's only going to take you about 5 minutes to go through. But what it's going to do is to help you identify what are your biggest distractors. We all have different distractions, right? And what we want to do is to figure out what those are, just identify them so that we can use tactical strategies to combat those things. So in the distraction action plan, I'm going to give you some of the really common ones, but I'm also going to ask you to think about what works for you. And so I had a client, this was like mid-pandemic, and he was a lawyer, he was working from home, and he was like, I don't know what the deal is, but I'm just distracted all day long. And I said, let's track it actually. And so this is what I would suggest that folks do and download the distraction action plan is to track your distractions for just like a day or even a few hours. Just every time you get distracted, write down what it is. And you will see some very obvious trends by even just a few hours or the end of the day. And that will allow you to be able to say, oh, because I'm being distracted by pings and dings, maybe I need to deal with my notifications. Or I'm distracted by noises. Maybe I need to get some noise canceling headphones. Or I need to be listening to white noise or brown noise or something like that. He found that there were two things that were his biggest distractors. One of them was that he was thirsty. And so he found that he was many times a day going into the kitchen to get a drink of water, and it would take him a half an hour to get back to his desk because, he would see a mess there and clean it up, or one of his kids was there and he would talk to them, etc. How did we solve this? We put a giant water bottle on his desk so he could satisfy his thirst without having this big distraction. The other one was one of his kids. And so knowing that, he was able to have a conversation with that kid to figure out how to get that kid's needs met without him busting in on his dad constantly all day long. And so that's actually why tracking is important. So in that distraction action plan, you'll get some of the big ones that most people have, but you'll also have a space to have what are your personal distractions that you're going to think about tactics for handling.
Alexis, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've absolutely loved every minute of it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
To our Core Happiness listeners, you can find all of the contact information for Alexis, as well as the link to download the Distraction Action Plan in the show notes. I thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to rate it or leave a review. If you have any thoughts or questions, I would love to hear from you. You can email podcast@corehappiness.com. For show notes and additional resources, you can visit www.corehappiness.com. As always, please remember, never let anyone diminish your light. Until next time, sending you my love.